Invitatul ediției este scriitorul american Jonathan Franzen, autor al romanelor bestseller Corecții, Puritate și Libertate. Toate aceste cărți s-au vândut în milioane de exemplare în toată lumea. Jonathan Franzen este starul rock and roll incontestabil al literaturii.
Jonathan Franzen a fost prezent la Iași la Festivalul Internațional de Literatură și Traducere. A scris până în prezent 6 romane. Corecții, cel care i-a adus succesul, a fost recompensat cu premiul National Book Award în 2001 și nominalizat la premiul Pulitzer în 2002. A urmat Libertate, un roman considerat de critici opera unui geniu, apoi Puritate. Jonathan Franzen este în acest moment unul dintre cei mai influenți scriitori și gânditori ai planetei.
Thank you for this interview, Mr. Franzen.
It's great to be in Iaşi.
You are in Romania to meet your readers at the International Literature Festival here in Iași, and it's wonderful to have you and looking forward to hearing insights into your work tonight. How do you perceive this kind of interaction with your audience, big theater, big audience, waiting to be entertained, seduced, inspired?
I like a public event. I particularly like meeting readers afterwards. My favorite part of a public event is when we get questions from the audience. What's fun about it is it's the exact opposite of writing. With writing, I'm very, very careful. If I don't like something, I can go back and change it again. The public events bring out the actor side of me. I have to be alive in real time, and it's exciting because I don't know what's coming next, and that's why I particularly enjoy the questions from the audience. It's just like it's like you're playing a sport or something. Oh, here comes the ball, you have to do something with it. So yeah, they're really fun for me, actually.
Do you remember one particular question that you received from the audience and liked it or disturbed you?
It's interesting you ask that because I have the feeling I should be keeping a notebook when I do these things, because every time I do one, there's at least one amazing question. Unfortunately, the ones that I remember are the stupid or the hostile questions.
Okay.
But they're often, what's a great question?
You can...
I think even if I waited 10 minutes, I wouldn't be able to remember one. Again, it's because these events happen in real time, and the thing comes up and then, wow, that's an amazing question, and I'm there, and then it's gone. I forget it. Yeah, so, sorry.
You once said that writing novels is useless. Have you changed your opinion in the meantime, given the fact that more than 10 years have passed since you made that assertion?
I think it's a mistake to think that novels change the world, that they have some kind of social agency. I think if you start thinking that, then you become either self-important or you start trying to lecture people, tell them what to do. When I was very young, yes, I thought, oh, I'll write a novel and it will change the world. No, I continue to think that they are useless, and it's good to have useless things in the world. Not everything needs to have a use. I think novels are for pleasure.
Did you ever consider at one point or another that reading novels is useless or pointless?
I think for the writer and for the reader, a good novel is an experience. The writing of one is a tremendous experience for the writer, and if it's a good novel, you are changed by what you read, and as you are by any strong experience. So I think a novel can make a personal difference to an individual. If I hadn't been reading, I wouldn't have become a writer. So it changed my life to read some of these great novels when I was young. I think of The Great Gatsby or Kafka's The Trial, Anna Karenina, the Brothers Karamazov. These are books that really opened the world up to me and made me who I am. So is that useful? I don't know.
So a book cannot change the world, but it can change people.
Yes, and I think particularly in this world, which is so drenched in social media and the internet, people's attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. For a person who feels left out of that, who feels, I don't recognize this kind of world, it can be a real refuge to pick up a book and read for hours and hours and hours. I feel so grateful to a writer who can create a book like that makes me forget about the world. It's not like I'm not engaged. I'm more alive when I'm reading in many ways than when I'm watching the news or doing something on the internet. But I think there's a certain way of looking at the world that literature offers, and only literature offers. And if that's the way you look at the world, it's great to be in the company of other people who do that. It's one of the things that's nice about a festival like this. All the strange people who still care about books get together, and you see, oh, I go through the world, I feel like a freak. But I'm not a freak. Here are other people. Every once in a while when I do an event, someone will come up to me in a signing line and introduce me to someone and say, we met in a line at one of your events and now we're married. That's an extreme case, but I think there is a sense that readers are they're a minority. They'll always be a minority. And yet it's not a minority that's going away. And the writer serves in that community, providing things to read, basically, to keep a culture alive for the people who look at things in a complicated way like literature does.
So you had 2 novels published by the age of 30.
God, is that right? Yeah, almost. Yeah.
Very, very different from what would follow in Corrections, which is a story about family crisis. What determined you to write this book?
Well, when I was writing those books in my 20s, I had a sense of social mission. I thought the world will be a better place if I can just explain what's wrong with it. And I published those 2 books, and sadly the world did not change. And it's very complicated. I was going through a lot of things in my early 30s. My marriage was breaking up, my father was dying, and I realized that in my heart, I didn't really care about changing the world. Partly because I wasn't sure I knew the right way to do it. If you immerse yourself in literature, you become more and more doubtful about your own convictions. I have my own politics. I think they're more correct than the opposite kind of politics, but I'm not sure. And so I gave up on thinking I know the answer and I'm going to use these novels to tell people the answer, and started to try to write the book I would really want to read, and that turned out to be a very different thing. I wanted to be funnier and less angry. I think it's a common misunderstanding about my novels, especially from people who haven't read them, that I'm a very serious writer. I think of all my work as fundamentally comic. The Corrections in particular was written for laughs. When I would read from it after it was published, people would laugh because it's funny. But there were people in the audience who came up to me and said, I had no idea I was supposed to laugh, because you're presented with a book, you're presented with literature, and literature is serious, and that means you can't laugh. And
the book is about a man who's falling apart. He's
sad stuff.
Fighting dementia.
Exactly.
It's sad stuff, yes.
Exactly, but there's a great tradition. If you think of Beckett, Beckett is full of characters who are at the extreme edge of existence. And Beckett is hilarious. A man struggling to get his pants up. It's terrible, of course. One can take a very socially concerned view and say, well, someone should be helping this man get his pants up. And what kind of world do we live in where a man has to struggle like that? But it's also, it's inherently funny, too. So, yeah, I started to try to write about how things were, not how I thought they should be.
So before Corrections, you were that writer who invents characters by scratch and doesn't let personal life penetrate fiction. And then you opened this box. How did it feel?
It's true that in the Corrections, I wrote closer to my own life than I had before. The father in the Corrections is quite a bit like my own father. I had permission to do that because both of my parents had died. But I wrote some of it, well, my mother was still alive, and she lived to read a little bit of that. She wasn't happy, but she wasn't too unhappy. That was a one-time thing. I've never taken a character straight from life the way I did with my father and Alfred in the book. There are a few scenes from life in the novel, but almost everything is still invented. But I think The Corrections was the book where I realized what I do is create characters. And one of the reasons it took me 8 years to write the book and another 8 years to write Freedom was that I had begun to take seriously the difficulty of creating characters, really complicated characters. And obviously I don't write in a vacuum. I'm not writing about purple-haired people with 3 arms from a different planet. I'm writing all of my experience is going directly into these characters, but a character is different from a person. A character is much, much more comprehensible than a person. A character needs something and wants something, and then it's all very artificial. There are these conventions of fiction that simplify things, and then it's the kind of wonderful capacity of the human imagination to take a very simple concept of a character. A person is a lot more complicated than this book. And a character, one of the characters is this much. Well, that's a very small amount of words. But the great thing about reading, and only reading, is that so much more develops in the reader's head than is on the page. And I think that the same is true on the writing side. You take this immense amount of material and condense it into this very, very efficient form that then blows back up into a whole lot when it's experienced by the reader.
It seems to me that in your novels, the characters are the story.
Yeah. Well, that's an Aristotelian...
And the plot, the narrative, is just a pretext.
My first 2 novels, I was much more concerned with plot. I would have the plot, and then I would try to have the characters do what they were supposed to. And it turns out to be much more fun to create a character and the character is defined by the problem they have, and then just watch and see what happens. So yes, absolutely.
So it took 8 years to write Freedom. And you wrote in Purity, I think, if time is infinite, then 3 seconds and 3 years are the same infinitely small fraction of it. Should I take this as an answer to why 8 years, why so long? Or should I consider that Catcher in the Rye was written in 20 years and take back the question?
One of my favorite pieces of writing by Thomas Mann is an essay called Lob der Vergänglichkeit, which is in praise of transience. And he talks there about how quickly time passes when you're really engaged with writing. Time passes quickly when you're sleeping, but the only other time it passes as quickly is, for me, is when I'm really engaged with what's on the page in front of me. I'll look at my watch and it's suddenly 4 hours later. And it happened like that. So Mann was talking about a paradox. Time never passes more quickly for a writer than when the writer is working well. And yet when I look back, having written, it feels like those are the moments in my life, those are the years in my life when I felt immortal.
Your fifth novel, Purity, was described as piercingly brilliant, entertaining, and funny. And I most giggled when reading the paragraph about Charles' efforts to write the next great American novel. His whinings more and his drinking more than writing. Was that self-parody or was your sarcasm aimed at the literary industry in general?
If you know a lot of writers, you know people like Charles. The envy that Charles feels for other writers, that's self-parody. Every writer is envious. And if they say they aren't, they're probably lying.
What writers are you envy of?
Oh, it doesn't matter. Whoever has a book out right now. You should think it's a large world. There's plenty of room for all of us. But somebody is getting attention today. That means I'm not getting attention. What do you mean? There's a childish part, I think, of many writers that feels really all people should be doing is reading their own work. And yes, I don't produce novels very often, but you can go back and reread these things. It's like you imagine a world in which it's only you, and that's Charles.
So a lot of whiskey involved as Charles is trying to deliver the big book.
Charles does drink.
I wonder what your writing routine is. Are you a morning man like Murakami?
I'm a morning man, yes.
Yes. Do you drink 50 cups of coffee per day like Balzac?
I know a couple writers who drink like 30 espressos a day, and they're insane. No, I have 2 cups of strong coffee, one before I start and one in the middle of the day. The important thing is to work 7 days a week, and I go at exactly the same time, and I park in the exact same parking space, and I go up to my dark room, and it's always painful to start writing, and the more it's a routine, the more you're not paying attention to anything else, the easier it is to get back into the pain of writing.
Any strange habits?
Any strange habits? Not that I'd care to talk about.
Okay. Many writers seem to hate writing, or many writers hated writing. Do you think that writing is torture to endure for sins you've made in previous lives, like Joyce once put it? Or do you actually enjoy it, have fun writing books?
It's very absorbing. I think it's, you know, tennis is a writer's game, and I think the experience of tennis is quite similar to writing in that I am constantly aware I could be making better shots. Often I'm on the court and I'm just hating every mistake I make. And yet it's utterly absorbing. And I just want to keep trying. And when you hit a sweet shot, when a few words fall on the page and you immediately say yes, it makes up for all of the torture of failing to hit a good shot.
And this is my last question.
Yes.
A very terrible question. I hope you will forgive me for it. One of your characters in Purity, a very important one, Andreas Wolf, says, "It sucks to be well known." Your book sold millions of copies. You were hailed as the great American novelist. You were on the cover of Time magazine. Fair to say you are well known. So,
as well known as a writer can be, which is not very well known.
Does it suck to be well known?
Not for me, but I'm not that well known. It doesn't. If you're a Hollywood star, you just cannot exist in public. I can exist in public, and I think it's harder for my partner, my wife, my spouse equivalent. If we're at a restaurant and someone comes up to me, I don't mind it, because it doesn't happen that often. Somebody coming up and say, "Hey, I love your work," or "You're great." Who doesn't enjoy that? If it only happens once a month. No, I don't think it sucks to be well known, but I think that's, Andreas had a different level of fame, and
I think he also said that it feels lonely.
There is that. That's one of the reasons I moved from New York to California, to a relatively small town in California. In New York, there's such a hierarchy, and if everyone is comparing themselves to everyone else. I walk into a room and I feel people comparing. It's different to be in a small town and to be part of a community. That goes away, so it's not as lonely for me. I believe Pip responds by saying, "Oh, poor you." She, wow, you're a self-pitying person. You've got all this, and you're still sorry for yourself. No, I'm not really lonely, and mostly I like to stay home and work, or else go bird watching. But it's just fun to have a room full of people who've come to hear you speak. I enjoy that.
Thank you, Mr. Franzen, for sharing
Thank
your
you.
views.
Very nice talking to you.